Thank you so much, Jim and Cindy and Tom and Huck. Sorry, Tom and Becky. I'm Huck, I guess. Modern day Huck. Anyway, it's such a pleasure to be back here in Hannibal. I canoed the river back in 2009, and by far, Hannibal was such a special place to step out onto. And from the very beginning, folks here were just so kind. The idea of the journey, I've been an expatriate for, I guess, 20 years off and on, living in Africa and living in East Asia, traveling about. And the idea, the more you travel, it's a blessing and a curse. One of the curses is that you just want to travel more and more. It's highly addicting. And you always sort of sit with your fellow expatriates in some far-flung locale, and you talk about where it is that you want to go. And so you talk about places like Timbuktu, you talk about places like Delhi, like Pamplona possibly. But the idea of actually coming back into my home country and really trying to touch it from the very epicenter, from the Mississippi River, and experiencing it firsthand on my own, but as a citizen journalist attempting to blog and to share those stories with in some cases, a worldwide audience, was something that really appealed to me, to really try to highlight the positive of my home country. And so to come back was something great. Part of the journey was the actual stories along the way. And then the other part of the journey, of course, was on the river, the natural part of it. So let me just have a couple of selected short readings here. This is from chapter 4. There's a connection to this river that's impossible to explain unless you've ridden upon it at length, lived alongside it, or opened yourself up to it. It's a sort of love affair that began to develop at this stage of my journey. The river was starting to talk to me, to whisper sweet nothings, to tell me her stories. I was an obliging and eager audience. The early sun peeks through translucent clouds or the tops of bankside trees, conjuring flickering shapes on the water. The river reflects the leaves, dancing in a cool breeze on either side of the still narrow course. But then the sun comes out in full force, stunningly bright and omnipresent. I paddled throughout the day, zipping off the bottoms of my convertible trousers to create shorts, taking off all superfluous clothing, alternating between paddling hard and taking it easy, at least when the current cooperated. Once a day, with the canoe drifting sideways in a steady, gentle downriver current, I laid back, struck a match, and lit an American Spirit cigarette and enjoyed a smoke. With my bare feet on the canoe's yoke, taking in the immense heavens and the clouds drifting overhead, I paid homage to Huckleberry Finn and Twain.
I got out amongst the driftwood and then laid down in the bottom of the canoe and let her float. I laid there and had a good rest and a smoke out of my pipe, looking away into the sky, not a cloud in it. The sky looks ever so deep when you lay down on your back in the moonshine. I never noted before.
A stylized image of an eagle is printed on the paper of each cigarette, and as I inhaled and exhaled, on one day in particular, I noticed a bald eagle perched up in a tree, just up into my side, silently surveying the same vista of this glorious land, but from a more majestic vantage point. Or was it? I try to explain to people, and to remember it correctly myself, that there is nothing quite like being on the water, down low in a canoe, effortlessly gliding along. It is unadulterated bliss. It liberates the mind from everyday worries and cares. The river gently sweeps you into a union with nature. So that's just a little taste of the nature part of the story. The other part of the journey, again, was to try to park the canoe and to step into different communities and to try to find the players that were actively making the community spin. And so I was really trying to sort of, one of the undercurrents of the story is to highlight the sort of the economic downturn and what advice people from the middle of the country would have for the rest of the world and how to survive in these trying times. This town, Clarksdale, they've had a hard time for a very long time, and their factory just closed. People are laid off and whatnot, and and yet you have the vehicle that's sort of spinning the economy there is the blues. Okay, so I was told about one lady named Mary Action Jackson, and that I could not miss her. So this is the story of Mary Action Jackson. To get to the pizza joint off the main thoroughfare, Delta Avenue, I walked under a blanket of stars through a maze of alleys. At the door, I paid a $5 cover charge that included a first drink. When I arrived, more people were on stage setting up than in the audience, and I wondered if I'd be the only paying customer. I took a seat with my complimentary Coors Light. But by the time Mary Action Jackson took the makeshift stage and grabbed the mic, the seats had filled and the place had transformed from a pizza parlor to a juke joint. "We're the all-night blues band," she announced to raucous cheers and whistles. Bad Apple was on lead guitar, and female musicians played bass and shook the tambourines. A huge white guy who looked like he had walked out of the film "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" strutted about on the stage, huffing and puffing on a harmonica. Wearing a gold hat and dress and a necklace of crocodile teeth, Action Jackson lived up to her name. Her exuberance was infectious as she cavorted on the stage, interacting with the audience. The joint was jumping and jiving. It was a fairly typical night in Clarksdale, a town where the blues is a religion, and Trisha's Italian restaurant and pie hole is a church. Quote, "Blues is the music that people listen to help escape their troubles," end quote. Jay Seelman, executive director of the Blues Foundation, had told me upriver in Memphis. Quote, "Blues music is what people do to get rid of the blues. They went out on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday night and celebrated, and they did it through blues music. So blues music doesn't give you the blues, it helps take away your blues. That's the significance, and I think that's why it's as popular today as it's ever been, and also why it'll be around forever." And Twain.
We have all had the blues, the mere sky blues, but mine were indigo.
So that was the story, part of the story of the blues from chapter 11. But what I'd like to do now is actually to invite my good friend Danny Wilson to come on up and bring the story back to Hannibal via the blues.
Big crowd. All right, this is kind of a surprise. Neal asked me to do this last night over dinner, and I realized I hadn't played this song in about a year, so I had forgotten. I hadn't forgotten the lyrics, but they weren't real fresh in my mind. So we'll see how it goes. But anyway, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Mark Twain Words and Music CD that's out there right now. Well, this song, and Neal heard this in its very early stages, which I'm going to play. And if you have heard this song, it's much different than the version that you'll hear on the Mark Twain, or quite a bit different. Lyrically, very similar, musically a little different than the version on there. We were here, I think it was a February day, a snowy February day. It was the day of the Mardi Gras pub crawl here in town. And Neal was back here working on his book, so we sat in the wine stop downtown and had some wine, and he read some of his book, and I got the nerve up to play this song, and it kind of took off from there, and it ended up that, as some of you might know, that Brad Paisley recorded it. And you were talking about blues. You'll realize it's not a blues at all. It was originally, it was originally written. I had in mind a talking blues, kind of a Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie talking blues. But my co-writer Emily Hayes back there, she heard it the first thing, and she's like, no, we got to do something different with that. So it ended up being a lot more of a melancholy sort of thing. So here we go. Here I sit about midnight, so darn lonesome, not a soul in sight. Paps out drinking in Hannibal town, so it's through the window and I shimmy down. There's only so much sleep a boy can stand when the witching hour's so close at hand. Across the alley and then over the fence, the night air crackling with dark suspense. Beneath the window I hunker low and conjure up my best cat call. Tom crawls through the window and hits the ground like two tomcats will make our rounds. And it's down to the river or the old graveyard. There's no better living than living hard, high on the midnight air. Take me anywhere a boy can be free. just the moonlight, Tom Sawyer and me. So we'll hit the back streets before it gets light. This town's full of ghosts and gamblers tonight. It's down to Bear Creek for a moonlight dip, cigars and whiskey on the banks we'll sit. Oh, we'll steal a raft in the river sway and head on down New Orleans way. Oh, but Tom's head is in a whirl, his mind wrapped around that Thatcher girl. And it's down to the river or the old graveyard. There's no better living than living hard, high on the midnight air. Take me anywhere a boy can be free. Just the moonlight, Tom Sawyer and me.
Thank you so much. That's great. Just to finish off here in Hannibal, one of the highlights, a definite highlight of my entire life, was being, and I couldn't believe my ears when Cindy here offered, but to have the chance to sleep over in the Mark Twain boyhood bedroom was just, it was ridiculous. I mean, it was great. It was unbelievable. And when the offer was made, we checked the history books, and it turned out that I would be the second person in nearly 100 years to do it, the first person in 50 years. And so this is the end of the chapter 7, which is the Hannibal chapter, which I see some friendly faces here. Some folks figure into that chapter as well. My last night in Hannibal, I slept over, and here's just the end of that chapter. I laid out my bedding on the bedroom floor, but was too excited to sleep, so I read for about an hour from the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Sam Clemens lived in this house from age 4 to 17. At the time, life on the western frontier could be brutish and short. Death was a common occurrence, from disease, violence, drowning. Mark Twain later wrote that as a boy in Hannibal, he received news of every death as a warning from Providence. In this very room, he wrestled with his conscience at night and vowed to mend his ways, at least until morning.
With the going down of the sun, my faith failed and the clammy fears gathered about my heart. It was then that I repented. Those were awful nights, nights of despair, nights charged with the bitterness of death. After each tragedy, I recognized the warning and repented and begged like a coward, begged like a dog, and not in the interest of those poor people who had been extinguished for my sake, but only in my own interest. It seems selfish when I look back on it now. My repentances were very real, very earnest, and after each tragedy, they happened every night for a long time. But as a rule, they could not stand the daylight. They faded out and shredded away and disappeared in the glad splendor of the sun. They were the creatures of fear and darkness, and they could not live out of their own place. They gave me cheer and peace, and at night I repented again. In all my boyhood life, I am not sure that I ever tried to lead a better life in the daytime, or wanted to. But in my age, as in my youth, night brings me many a deep remorse. I realize that from the cradle up, I have been like the rest of the race, never quite sane in the night.
And then it was morning. It was the first day of autumn, and the air was sweet and peaceful. I looked up from where I lay to the back bedroom window, the one that young Sam used to escape from the house for nighttime rambles. Then I looked to my left and saw a window I had failed to notice that in the dark and previous night. This side window, I suddenly realized, provided the view that shaped his imagination. There, directly ahead, was Main Street, and just beyond was the Mississippi River.